In January 2026, Dave Turin made a decision that nearly everyone around him believed was a serious mistake. Not a small misstep. Not even a, "that's risky, but I see your reasoning" kind of move. This was the kind of decision seasoned professionals quietly interpret as a loss of judgment. The kind where people start wondering if experience has finally dulled your edge. If ambition is pushing you somewhere, your wisdom should have stopped you from going. The ground Dave chose for that season was in a part of the Klondike that most serious miners didn't take seriously. It was remote, hard to access, geologically complicated in ways that had produced inconsistent and disappointing results for more than 30 years. Operation after operation had tried and struggled. Just getting equipment to the site would cost a fortune. Building infrastructure in unforgiving terrain would stretch any crew thin. On paper, the economics already looked marginal before a single ounce of gold could be pulled from the earth. His partners reviewed the projections and passed. An equipment supplier who had supported Dave through multiple seasons and 2 different mining operations refused to extend the credit line the new site would require. 2 crew members from his previous season told him directly they wouldn't make the move. "The risk profile doesn't make sense," one of them said. "I've watched you build something real. I don't want to watch you lose it on ground that doesn't deserve the investment." Dave listened. He took every concern seriously, the way someone with real experience does. When smart people disagree with you, it doesn't automatically mean they're wrong. And Dave knew that, but he also knew something they didn't. So the man who built his reputation in the Klondike on operational excellence and stubborn conviction went to that ground anyway. 1 season later, the same people who warned him were staring at $175 million in documented gold recovery from that site, the largest single operator haul in Klondike history. And they were trying to understand how they had read the situation so completely wrong. It wasn't luck. It wasn't unusually favorable conditions. It wasn't a sudden spike in the gold market. It came from something specific Dave understood about that ground. Something no one else had taken the time to fully understand. And to see how he did it, you have to understand who Dave Turin really is. The operator. In mining, there's a type of person who doesn't get the same attention as the bold visionary or the high-risk gambler, but who quietly drives most of the real success in the industry. The operator, not the one with the flashiest theory, not the one betting everything on instinct, not the one overriding contrary evidence with pure belief. The operator is the person who takes a site, any site, with all its variables, logistical headaches, harsh conditions, and mechanical demands, and runs it with such discipline and efficiency that they extract more value from it than anyone else could. At his core, Dave Turin is an operator. He came to the Klondike through his work with Todd Hoffman's mining operation, not as the frontman or visionary, but as the machinery expert, the one who made the equipment function, the one who understood machines beyond simply running them. He knew their limits. He could hear a sound and detect a problem before it became a breakdown. He understood how subtle adjustments in different ground conditions could mean the difference between decent recovery and exceptional recovery. His reputation wasn't built on dramatic moments. It was built on consistency, in an industry that celebrates big strikes and often forgets the grinding, disciplined work between them. Television celebrates peaks. Dave built steady upward slopes. When he eventually separated from the Hoffman operation and created his own venture, Lost Mine, he built it around everything he'd learned about what truly makes mining work. Not theory, not hype, execution. Equipment was maintained to standards that prevented the costly breakdowns that crippled other crew seasons. Crew members were chosen for competence and character, not for entertainment value. Ground selection wasn't based solely on theoretical gold content, but on operational feasibility, what it would actually take to mine it profitably, not what might happen if everything went perfectly. As one Klondike observer once noted, Dave mines ground most people say isn't worth his time, and produces more from it than anyone else could. That isn't luck, That's operational mastery. Most miners focus on finding better ground. Dave focused on becoming better at mining, and that mastery was the foundation for everything that followed. It's what allowed him to look at remote, punishing terrain, ground that serious miners dismissed, and see not just the obstacles, but the opportunity hidden behind them. The obstacles were real. Dave never pretended otherwise. He respected real obstacles, but he also understood that the opportunity was greater, and he could calculate the difference. The research before committing to that claim, Dave spent 14 months researching it. 14 months, not a quick survey, not a short preliminary season. 14 months of systematic investigation. He studied geological reports. He analyzed historical production data. He visited the site in different seasons to understand how changing conditions affected operations. He spoke with anyone who had first-hand knowledge of the region's mining history. That process was classic Dave. He didn't move quickly on conviction. He moved carefully on evidence. And once the evidence was complete, once it justified conviction, he moved decisively. From the outside, that decisiveness can look impulsive. But what people don't see is the preparation behind it. What those 14 months revealed was a complex picture, one that only made sense when viewed in full context. And that's exactly why so many others got it wrong. They looked at the surface challenges and stopped there. Dave kept digging long before he ever put a shovel in the ground. Most people had looked at the surface picture and stopped there. Dave looked at every layer beneath it. And to be fair, the surface picture was discouraging. Access to the claim was difficult. Previous operators had pulled inconsistent results from it. The geology was complicated, the kind of complexity that standard Klondike mining methods don't handle well. Infrastructure costs alone were heavy. By any quick calculation, the risk-to-reward ratio looked bad. But Dave hadn't done a quick calculation. He'd spent 14 months building a complete one. What his research revealed was deeper and far more interesting. The inconsistent results from earlier operations weren't proof the ground was poor. They were proof those operators had mined the wrong sections, using methods designed for simpler geology. The site's complexity had beaten them, not because the gold wasn't there, but because they weren't equipped to adapt fast enough to reach it. When Dave overlaid the full production history of every past attempt with the detailed geological survey he commissioned, a clear pattern emerged. Every crew that worked this ground failed the same way, he explained to the partners who would later decline to invest. They came in with a standard approach. They hit the complex geology. They couldn't adjust quickly enough, and they left before reaching the sections where the complexity gives way to something much simpler and much richer. The geological difficulty wasn't evenly spread across the claim. It was concentrated at the entry points, the sections any crew would encounter first. Those sections had defeated every previous operator. But beyond that barrier, the survey data showed formations consistent with exceptional gold concentration. It was like a castle with a brutal approach. Most attackers fail at the gates, not because the castle is impossible to take, but because getting through the approach requires capabilities they don't have. Dave had spent his career developing those capabilities. If you can move through the complex geology with an operational approach that adapts instead of fighting it, he said during those January 2026 planning meetings, you reach ground nobody has ever properly mined. The difficulty isn't proof of bad ground. It's proof the ground has been protected. Protected ground. That was Dave's frame. Something exceptional had been sitting there for decades, untouched. Not because it lacked value, but because the path to it defeated everyone who tried, and Dave had a plan for that path. The plan. The operational plan Dave built for the site was unlike anything he'd run before. Not because it required new technology, not because it demanded revolutionary equipment, but because it demanded flexibility, a level of operational mobility most mining operations aren't built to sustain. Standard Klondike mining works like this. Choose a site, set your wash plant, build your infrastructure, and mine from that fixed position all season. That model works beautifully in consistent geology, It works poorly in complex, variable geology, especially when productive gold is distributed in pockets instead of long, continuous formations. Dave's research had revealed that this claim didn't contain one massive, uninterrupted rich zone. It held multiple high-grade pockets separated by sections of transitional geology. Difficult, expensive material that yielded relatively little gold. A traditional fixed-position operation would process everything around it, including the low-grade transitional ground, just to reach the richer sections. On paper, that's exactly why the economics looked marginal. Dave's solution was different. Multiple wash plant positions across the season. Mobile infrastructure. Relocations as productive pockets were identified, mined out, and replaced with new targets. It's more work, Dave admitted openly. Every relocation costs time. Setup and breakdown cycles eat into production. On paper, it looks inefficient. The key phrase was, on paper. On paper, you're paying for relocations, Dave explained. In practice, you're avoiding the expensive processing of low-grade material between productive pockets. When you run the full season economics, the mobile approach produces more gold per dollar than a fixed setup. But there was a catch. It only works if you know where the pockets are before you move. That's what the 14 months of research had given him. A map. Not a guess. Not a hunch. A data-backed distribution model of where the gold-rich pockets were likely to be. Every planned relocation had a geological rationale. Nothing was improvised. The crew Dave assembled a smaller crew than in previous seasons. Not because the job was smaller, but because it required a specific type of person. Adaptable over specialized. Problem solvers over routine operators. He was direct during hiring. This won't feel like a standard Klondike season, he told candidates. It's going to be more physically demanding. There won't be much routine. The ground will keep changing. I need people who enjoy solving new problems, not people who want to walk into a system where everything's already figured out. If you want routine, he said plainly, this isn't your operation. The people who said yes understood what they were signing up for. And as the season unfolded, their value extended far beyond their job descriptions. The execution, the first productive pocket, came on day 19. Dave's geological model had predicted gold-bearing ground in the northeast section of the claim within a specific depth range. Excavation reached that depth on day 17. Days 17 and 18 produced promising indicators, particle size and morphology, suggesting primary deposition rather than reworked material. That meant the gold hadn't just been moved around by natural processes. It likely originated there. On day 19, they did a cleanup. 94 ounces. By Klondike standards, that wasn't a record-breaking number. It wasn't the kind of hole that makes headlines. But Dave wasn't focused on the weight. He was focused on what the gold told him. The shape, the consistency, the signal it confirmed. It matched the map, and that meant the real season was just beginning. What caught Dave's attention that day wasn't just the weight of the gold. It was its character. Holding a handful of freshly recovered pieces, he turned to his lead operator and said, "This is telling me something. Look at the crystalline structure. This isn't alluvial gold that's been moved around and worn smooth by water. This is coming straight off bedrock that hasn't been touched." They were looking at primary source material. In placer mining, that distinction matters. Alluvial gold has traveled, carried by water, scattered, redistributed. Primary source gold is different. It's close to where it was originally deposited. It hasn't been diluted by movement downstream, and that usually means higher concentration. Every experienced placer miner understands the difference. Finding primary source material in a placer operation is like discovering the headwaters of a river instead of sifting through what's been carried miles away. Dave's geological model had suggested primary source material was there. The cleanup on day 19 confirmed it in his hands. He immediately increased extraction in the northeast section while beginning survey work on the next pocket his research had mapped out. The advantage of his mobile approach became clear. He could focus intensely on a productive pocket, maximize recovery, and then relocate without being tied down to infrastructure that no longer made economic sense. The system he designed, built around the mapped distribution of gold pockets, started working exactly as intended, pocket by pocket. Each move informed by 14 months of geological research. Each relocation smoother than the last, as the crew developed fluency in breaking down and setting up again efficiently. Even Dave, who had designed the plan, was impressed by how smoothly it clicked into place. By the end of week 6, his cumulative production had already surpassed the best full season he'd ever run before. Week 6, in a 22-week season. At that point, the crew understood what was happening. You don't run numbers like that for 6 straight weeks without realizing you're part of something rare, something that will be talked about long after the season ends. But instead of getting careless or celebratory, the awareness sharpened them. When everyone understands they're building something historic, Dave would later reflect, and that understanding makes them more disciplined instead of less, you've got the right crew. He had the right crew. The scale of it. By week 12, the midpoint of the season, Dave Turin's recovery numbers had moved beyond personal bests or regional records. They entered territory that forced serious miners across the Klondike to stop and reassess what they thought was possible. These weren't flashy, one-time spikes. They weren't lucky cleanups. They were consistent production figures that didn't seem to match the visible size of the operation. Dave's wash plant capacity was known. His crew size was known. His operational hours were standard. There was no mechanical trick, no secret expansion, no obvious reason why the output should be so far ahead of what the operation's surface parameters suggested. The answer was the ground. The primary source material discovered in the northeast pocket wasn't an isolated anomaly. As the mobile operation progressed through the mapped pocket distribution, they kept encountering the same pattern. Primary source gold, high concentration, consistent density. The geological survey had suggested it was possible. But even Dave, after 14 months of careful, systematic research, was stunned to see it unfold in real production. I knew the data said it was there, he admitted during a mid-season assessment. But reading it in a report and watching it come off the plant at these concentrations are two very different experiences. The data was right. Honestly, it was more right than I was psychologically prepared for. That kind of statement, coming from one of the most operationally disciplined miners in the Klondike, said a lot. The ground everyone else had dismissed. The ground his partners refused to fund. The ground some crew members refused to work. It was producing at levels that exceeded even Dave's most optimistic projections. The call in September, the equipment supplier who had declined to extend Dave's credit line back in January, called him. Dave answered. He listened politely. When the supplier finished, Dave said calmly, "I appreciate you reaching out. I've got everything I need to finish this season. Let's talk in the spring about what next season looks like." He hung up and went back to the cleanup. The Klondike reckoning. The broader Klondike mining community reacted in stages. First came disbelief. Veteran miners, people who had seen big claims before that didn't hold up, assumed the numbers would normalize as the season went on. Extraordinary production from a site that had been written off. Surely it would taper. It didn't taper. Week after week, the numbers held. This wasn't a spike and decline story. It was steady, sustained output. The second stage was investigation. In the Klondike, due diligence doesn't mean reading reports. It means showing up. Despite the site's remote and difficult access, a steady stream of serious miners made the trip during the second half of the season. Not tourists. Professionals who needed to see it with their own eyes before accepting what they were hearing. What they found surprised them in a different way. The operation looked exactly like Dave Turin's operations always looked. Disciplined, methodical, quiet. No dramatic spectacle. No revolutionary machinery. No secret process. Nothing visually extraordinary that could explain the scale of production, except two things. The quality of the ground. and the quality of the operator mining it. "It's just Dave," one visiting miner said, almost bewildered. "It looks like Dave always looks," one miner said after visiting the site. "He's just mining better ground than any of us realized was there." That realization marked the third stage of the Klondike's response: geological reassessment. Across the region, operators began revisiting claims they had previously dismissed, using the same evaluation frameworks that had led them to write off Dave's ground. If his research process had uncovered something exceptional that conventional analysis labeled marginal, then maybe other sites had been misjudged too. Dave's approach became the main topic of conversation for the rest of the season. 14 months of systematic research, detailed mapping of gold pocket distribution, identification of primary source material indicators that standard assessments had overlooked. It wasn't just that Dave had found great ground, he had shown a different way to evaluate it. He didn't just discover exceptional ground, one mining consultant observed. He demonstrated a methodology for identifying it. Ground the Klondike may have been sitting on for years without knowing how to recognize. The long-term value of that methodology across the region could exceed what Dave personally recovered this season. True to form, Dave didn't try to guard his methods. He pointed out that much of his approach was built on geological theory and research others had developed before him. Sharing what he had refined felt natural to him, part of how knowledge should circulate in a working industry. "I didn't invent the geology," Dave said. "I just applied it more carefully than the previous people who looked at this ground." Someone else can apply it more carefully than I did somewhere else. That's progress. The final tally. When the season ended, the final numbers went through multiple rounds of verification. Dave understood that extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof. He ran the assays 3 separate times. He used 2 independent assessors for final valuation. He documented every step of the recovery process with meticulous detail. He knew the results would be scrutinized, and the more they exceeded existing benchmarks, the more scrutiny they would invite. The gross recovery was staggering. At current gold prices, verified production translated to $178 million. Operational costs, which were higher than a standard fixed position season, just as his preseason projections had anticipated, brought the net figure to $175 million. Dave looked at that number for a long time, not with wild celebration, not with disbelief, with satisfaction. Dave Turin relates to results the way an operator does. The reward isn't just the size of the number, it's whether the output matches the quality of the input. And in this case, the input had been exceptional. 14 months of disciplined research, a carefully engineered mobile operational strategy, the right crew, the right ground. The result matched the preparation. "That money is the score," Dave said when someone asked how the number felt. "But the score reflects the game. What I'm proud of isn't the number. It's that the research was right. The operational plan worked exactly the way it was designed to work. Every decision from January through October held up when tested against reality." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "And yeah, the number's good." Aftermath. In the days following the verified tally, Dave called the very people who had warned him in January that he was making a mistake. Not to gloat, to share the documentation, the geological surveys, the research framework, the operational planning structure. He wanted them to understand what had actually happened and why. Some of them admitted they wished they had listened, and in the end, that may have been the most telling outcome of all. Not that Dave proved everyone wrong, but that he proved careful research, disciplined execution, and the courage to trust both can turn dismissed ground into historic results.